Chapter 4. The old Detroit station looked more like an armed camp than a precinct house. Bullet holes pockmarked the outside of the brick building. Most of the police turbo cruisers lined up in the street outside boasted dozens of dents and scratches. Murphy pulled his gas-guzzling station wagon into the parking lot next door, grabbed his athletic bag, and headed for the front entrance. A prisoner transport vehicle pulled up and disgorged a half-dozen lowlifes who looked like walking threats to Darwin's theory of evolution. Murphy took his encoded police badge and slid it into the slot next to the front door. The door buzzed, spat the badge back out, and unlocked the metal portal. Murphy stepped inside. The interior of the precinct house made the black hole of Calcutta seem cheerful. Cops, saddled with prisoners who all seemed to be wearing fly strips, wandered in and out of the booking stations. A cop in his 50s and built like a bull, Sergeant Reed, presided over the insanity like a benign Viking. Spotting Murphy, Reed left his elevated desk and walked towards him. Before he got 2 feet forward, a weasel of a man in a shiny suit attached himself to Reed's side. "About my client. Attempted murder is ridiculous. It's not like he killed someone or anything like that. This is clearly a violation of my client's civil rights, I bet." Reed smiled sweetly at the man, only his reddened face revealing his true emotions. "Listen, pal. Between you and me, your client's a scumbag. You're a scumbag, and we have a rule here. Scumbags talk to the judge on Monday morning. Now get out of my police station. Your client will still be here when you get back." The lawyer smiled weakly and shuffled away. Murphy was forced to laugh. Reed motioned Murphy over to his desk. Murphy reached into his athletic bag and pulled out a sheaf of useless paper. He handed it to Reed. "I'm Murphy, transferring from Metro South." Reed nodded, placing the papers on top of a stack of other useless forms. "Nice precinct. I understand they have croissant dispensers in the locker room, but we work for a living down here, Murphy. Get your armor and suit up." "Yes, sir." Murphy turned to leave. "I appreciate the kind words." Reed grabbed his elbow. "Oh, and Murphy?" "Yes, sir." "Have a nice day." Murphy smirked and headed towards the back of the station. He passed through 2 large metal doors. One of the doors had an old 8x10 photo of Rod Serling taped to it with the inscription, "Welcome to the Twilight Zone," scrawled across the surface. Murphy chuckled. "Abandon all sense, ye who enter here." Murphy wandered down an aisle, past both policemen and policewomen donning their armor. "I'm Murphy," he said to one cop. "I'm busy," the cop responded. "I'm looking for my locker." The cop reached over and pulled a name tag inscribed Duffy off the door to his left. "Take this one. No one's using it at the moment." Murphy tossed his athletic bag into the locker. Behind him, 3 wall-mounted TV monitors relayed information culled from all sectors of the city. A steady hum of data filled the air. Murphy sat down on the wooden bench behind him. The bench nearly crumpled under his weight. "We don't sit on those much," the cop to his left said. "Hazardous to your health." Murphy slowly donned his armor, listening to 3 cops mutter from nearby. "Any word about Fredrickson?" "They're still listing him as critical." His wife must be going out of her mind. Murphy adjusted the padding on his bodysuit. He pulled the sleeves tightly. On each sleeve was a patch. One patch read DPD, Detroit Police Department. The other patch read OCP, Omni Consumer Products. Murphy stared at the OCP patch, as if noticing it for the first time. It certainly was reassuring to be considered a thing by someone in a glass tower. The cop on his left noticed Murphy's glazed expression and smiled. "So, what brings you to this little paradise?" Murphy shrugged. "Transfer. OCP's restructuring the department." "The name's Manson," the cop said. "Murphy." A second cop walked up. The name Starkweather was emblazoned over his front pocket. "Restructuring, huh? Omnicon. Bunch of morons. They're gonna manage this department right into the ground. They cut 10 guys loose over on the east side." A cop named Ramirez said, "Just let them go. Said the precinct was overstaffed. Overstaffed my ass. We could use tanks down here." "And try to get backup when you're in a jam," Starkweather smirked. Manson snorted, "Try to find a medivac after you've been jammed. Fredrickson was out for almost an hour before anyone bothered to show up. The son of a bitch is lucky he had any blood left in his body by the time the Omnicon assholes arrived." Murphy cinched his shoes. The room fell quiet. Murphy looked up as Reed, his jaw tight and carrying an empty cardboard box marked Cheerios, walked up to a locker bearing Fredrickson's nameplate. He stared at the nameplate and slowly began emptying the contents of the locker into the box. All eyes were on Reed. All eyes but for Starkweather's, his back towards the sergeant. Starkweather continued his harangue. "I tell you what we should do to those Omnicon assholes. We should strike. Fuck them and their high-tech paychecks." Murphy flashed Starkweather a "not now" look. Starkweather turned slowly, in time to see Reed remove a picture of Fredrickson's family and place it in the box. The sergeant slid the nameplate off the door and placed it on top of Fredrickson's personal belongings. When he turned and faced his men, he seemed a good 10 years older than he had only moments before. "The funeral will be tomorrow," he said in a monotone. "The department asks all officers not on duty to attend. Donations for Fredrickson's family may be given to Cecil, as usual." The cops in the room stared angrily at the floor. Reed picked up the box and walked towards the exit, stopping momentarily before Starkweather. "And I don't want to hear any more of this strike shit. We're not plumbers, we're police officers, and police officers don't strike." Reed marched to the door. He turned one last time. "Murphy, front and center." Murphy holstered his 9mm Matiba service revolver, grabbed his helmet, and slammed his locker door shut. He placed a reassuring hand on Starkweather's shoulder. "Don't worry about it. The whole department is screwed up right now." "Yeah, right." Murphy stepped back into the main precinct room. He strained his eyes to spot Reed. The sergeant wasn't at his desk. Murphy watched amazed as a suspect, a man with the build and temper of a wounded rhino, suddenly reared up from his chair during an interrogation and, hands manacled, ran head first for the front door. A small, visored cop, barely tall enough to come up to the man's elbow, leapt high into the air and kicked the crazy in the groin. The manacled giant swung his tethered fists in the cop's direction. The little cop, caught off guard, tumbled down onto the ground with a sickening thud. Grabbing a nightstick, the cop lunged for the big man and, in a series of surprisingly quick moves, beat the giant's head bloody. Reed walked up to Murphy's side and yelled in the direction of the fracas. "Hey, Lewis! When you're done fucking with your suspect, come over here!" The cop named Lewis slammed the giant in the head one final time. The prisoner collapsed onto the floor, taking 3 chairs with him. Lewis strolled over towards Murphy as Reed returned to his elevated desk and chair. "Lewis," Reed said, "this guy's gonna be your new partner." The smaller cop nodded. Reed looked at Murphy. "Murphy, this is Lewis. Lewis'll show you the neighborhood." Murphy extended a hand. Lewis pulled the visor off her head, shaking loose a wave of cascading strawberry-colored hair. Murphy tried to hide his astonishment. Lewis grabbed Murphy's hand and pumped it as if she expected him to produce butter. "Glad to know you, Murphy." She smiled sweetly. Murphy pulled his hand back. It was red from her grip. "This way," she said, walking towards a side door. Murphy shook his head, confused, and followed. Reed sat at his desk, chuckling. "I give you my blessings," he intoned. "You make such a lovely couple." It was a dumb joke, but the cops closest to the booking desk laughed anyway. They'd take whatever humor they could, whenever they could find it. Murphy and Lewis walked into the parking garage. The place reeked of gasoline and carbon monoxide fumes as dozens of cops piled into their turbo cruisers and gunned them, preparing for afternoon patrol. Lewis, popping gum, led Murphy up to a patrol unit. "Pretty slick, huh?" Lewis said proudly. "Had bodywork on it last week. Sanded the bullet holes clean." Murphy nodded. "Pretty slick," he agreed. Lewis walked over to the driver's side of the car and yanked open the door. "I'd better drive until you know your way around." Murphy slid by her into the driver's seat. "I always drive when I'm breaking in a new partner." He closed the door, leaving Lewis popping gum furiously outside. Murphy fired up the engine while Lewis walked around the car and climbed into the passenger side. "Do you guys get to drive these things in Metro South? Or do you have chauffeurs?" she sneered. By way of response, Murphy slammed down on the gas, sending the turbo cruiser fishtailing along the off-ramp of the parking garage. At the street exit of the garage, 2 police cars stood, idling, the cops inside comparing horror stories of their night shift duty. Murphy grinned evilly and sent the turbo cruiser slicing between the 2 cars, missing them by inches. The car zoomed up onto the street and barreled off in a northerly direction. Lewis blew a large bubble and popped it. "Not bad," she said. "For a new kid." The car skidded down a side street, the gleaming skyline of the refurbished sectors of Detroit shining in the noonday sun behind. Lewis pointed to the metropolis in the rearview mirror as their car plunged into the slums of old Detroit. "Say goodbye to civilization, Murphy," Lewis said. Murphy glanced in the rearview mirror. The Omnicom Tower rising 151 glass and steel stories above the city, shone brightly. I'm not sure I call that civilization, Murphy muttered. You learn quick. Lewis smiled.